Hi, my name's Wendy and I'm from Sunflower Publishing. My guest this afternoon is a young lady, and I say young advisedly, she's younger than me, who is an actor, a singer, a writer, and an audiobook narrator. Such a talented lady, I feel honoured in her presence. Let's see if she's waiting to come through. Here she is. My computer's going very wobbly, so let me just change that. Barrie, hello.
Hi.
So lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you as well.
Beautiful, radiant smile.
Oh, thank you.
The first thing I know, I've just introduced you as an actor, a singer, a writer, an audiobook narrator. Please tell me there's something that you can't do.
I am lousy at visual art.
Okay.
I can't draw, I can't paint, I can't sketch, none of that stuff.
Right. But you are so ultra talented in every other way.
Thank you.
What struck me first was all the pictures that you have on your website and all those faces. That it's such a visual thing, isn't it? This is me. You know, your acting obviously comes out despair, happiness, jokey, naughty, sneaky. Such wonderful faces.
Thank you. Thank you.
You came across my path initially because I have an interest in audiobooks, and I know you do lots of those. I've taken to listening to stories now on audiobooks because sometimes you just don't have the time just to sit down and read a book. So it's kind of working on the hoof, isn't it, if you're listening to something. And I was listening to a wonderful book, The Venice Sketchbook by Rhys Bowen. And whenever I listen to an audiobook, I want to know more about, well, who is this person that narrated it? So that's how you kind of drifted into my little world. But let's start at the beginning. You are incredibly talented, as we say. Can you just take us back to, please, childhood, the journey? Where did it all start for you?
Interestingly enough, it all started in the room I'm currently sitting in, because although I live in New York City, I'm visiting my mother in Connecticut at the moment. So I'm tuning in from my childhood bedroom.
Oh, wow.
So literally began in the dark room behind me. Let's see. I loved performing and acting things out from the time I could talk. And I loved to write from the time that I could read. So both of those things, and I learned to read when I was 4. So both of those things have always sort of run in parallel, which I think is why audiobook narration is such a perfect field for me, because it really marries my love of acting with my love of reading and literature and words. And interestingly, I decided I wanted to be a professional actor when I was 8, when I grew up in the future. When I was about 8. I had seen a few Broadway shows and I had done a few, plays at school. And I just said that's a job that I can do. That's what I want to do. But before that, when I was about 5, my parents gave me a little audio cassette player so I could play my tapes, and it was portable. So I could, take it into the backyard with me or whatever. And it had a record button. And we always had blank tapes in our house. And I had at the time these read-along books from Disney, one of which was The Little Mermaid, which I was obsessed with. The movie, the Little Mermaid cartoon had just come out. I think we're talking like 1989, 1990. And I used to listen to that book all the time. And it was meant to help teach kids how to read. So it would say, when it is time to turn the page, you will hear the chime ring like this. Right? Yes. And one day, I guess, I must have been bored hanging out in this room. I'm an only child, so I amused myself a lot. And I decided to record my own version of that. So I have a tape of me reading The Little Mermaid and doing all the voices, because the dialogue that was in the audiobook was from the film. So it had all the character voices. And I'm attempting, a British accent and a Brooklyn accent, or just all the voices that of the characters in the film. And that just became something I would do now and then to amuse myself from the ages of about 5 to 8. So I have these cassette tapes of me basically narrating audiobooks as a child. And I forgot all about that for decades. And I've now been a narrator for 10 years. And it was just sometime within the past 3 or 4 years that I rediscovered those and thought, oh my God, I've been doing this my whole life and I didn't even realize.
Did you find that this, I suppose, interest that you have, well, more than an interest, a passion, was this nurtured at school? Was this nurtured by the family? How was it?
I think both, really. My parents, nobody else in my family is an artist of any kind, but my parents both loved musicals, Broadway musicals. And so I grew up listening to those soundtracks first, on records and then CDs. And so I was sort of steeped in musical theater from a young age. And my parents would take me to the theater. We're about 2 hours outside of New York. And so once or twice a year, we would go and see some Broadway shows in New York. We would go to the local theaters in our city. So I definitely was raised with a deep appreciation of theater, as well as music and dance and all of the performing arts. And then at school, we started doing plays at school, I think, in what we called junior kindergarten, so nursery school.
Okay.
And I just loved being on stage, but I was shy. So I loved pretending to be somebody else. For a very long time, I was terrified of being myself in front of a group of people. That really kind of came in adulthood, that I'm able to, get up in front of a crowd and talk and be me and have that be okay. But I loved becoming someone else and being in an imaginary world. And I did get the chance to do that at school.
The academic side, did that feature as well? Or was it just, no, this is the way I want to go? Or, I need exams, I need my English, I need exams to go with it.
All of the above. And education has always been very important in my family. So there was no question of I was going to college, and my parents discouraged me from going to what we would call a conservatory or a drama, in Britain they would call a drama school.
Yeah.
For undergrad.
Okay.
Because they felt that I needed a good liberal arts education. And I came to agree with them. When I was a sophomore in high school, I went and I looked at Juilliard and I looked at the conservatories at NYU and a couple other places. And because I've always had so many interests, particularly writing and literature, once I realized that I wouldn't be able to do those things if I went to drama school at 18, I said, okay, fine, I want to go and get a liberal arts degree. So I went, and I was a good student. I loved school like that. That was all part of it as well. There was
never any doubt that you would do anything else then. I might just go into nursing or, there was never any doubt. That path was for you, it was just already determined. That's
really was.
Something
from the time I was 8, just I want to be an actor. And almost, when I was in college, I went to Cornell University in upstate New York, which at the time had a really, really good liberal arts theater program with a lot of production. I got a lot of opportunity to be on stage, not as much kind of training in class, voice movement, that stuff. That is where I got into doing speech and dialects, which I can talk about later. But I was almost, in retrospect, too focused on being an actor. I was so determined to do everything that I could toward a career in professional acting that, in retrospect, I double majored in theater and English. But I thought, why didn't I could have taken a term abroad and gone to Oxford or Cambridge and read English for a semester, just had fun. But I was really I want to be an actor. This is what I want to do. So,
well, to a certain extent, when you are determined to do something and you have the passion to do that and it overrides everything else, these are the people that are going to succeed generally, aren't they? Really. Let's go through them all. So let's start with the writing first. We'll do each talent in order. I just love the website. You've got examples of your writing, you've got examples of your singing, you've got examples of all sorts of things. So let's start with the writing. Your first short story was at the age of 6. which I think is incredible. Most people wouldn't be able to remember that.
Yes. Well, it was a series, so I took for a few years.
I mean, you were really taking this seriously, weren't you? Even from
I was. Well, I was. Yes and no. I mean, I think it was just, I always had this overactive imagination, and I think that the thing about being an artist is that when you have big emotions or big thoughts, that you want to put them somewhere.
Yeah.
And if you have the ability to do that, then that's what, that really is, I think, what drives me more than anything else. It's like, what do I do with this? I have ideas. I want to communicate them, right? I'm a Gemini, so communication is like really, really important. And yeah, the story was called Rosie the Bear, and it was about one of my stuffed animals and her adventures with my other stuffed animals. I mean, very sort of typical kids like me playing pretend. I just happened to write them down.
That's a huge imagination, though, isn't it? do your family say, well, of course, she got the genes from me, or where on earth did that come from?
My late father could not believe that the genes came from him, because he was an electrical engineer and designed things and had patents. I mean, he was creative, but because he wasn't artistically creative and he couldn't carry a tune in a paper bag, that's I'm not talking out of school, he would have admitted that too. He couldn't sing, but it didn't stop him from singing. And he loved music and he loved to listen to music. So he was incredibly sort of awed by what I could do, because he couldn't do it. But I see his legacy sort of in my appreciation for the arts. And then my mother is a terrific writer and has worked in advertising and PR and that realm. Gosh, and she was an English teacher. Early in her career, she was an English teacher. So that also was the emphasis on, like, I always spoke properly and had correct grammar and those things.
That's funny, because I know you specialize in British accents. So when I tell you that I was born in the north of England, so I had a very, very northern accent. But now, to my parents, that was considered very lower class. Accents then, probably in the 60s and 70s, because at that time it was BBC English, it was the Queen's English. So accents, if you had a strong accent, you were sort of really considered, well, she must be working class then. And my parents paid for me to go to elocution lessons.
Wow. Okay. I was going to say, I hear a tiny bit of the
yes, and I think it's
not very much. It's
the words, like, I don't say bath, I say bath. Yeah. Because those are my northern roots, but we'll get on to the voices later.
Okay.
So you're an editor of an academic journal, and you.
I was. I was. Yeah. That was my what we would call my survival job for quite some time after college, as I edited journal articles for a company in India, actually.
And in 2013, you received a Davis Wickham Playwriting Award. I mean, you're notching up these awards, and you must have Oscars at the back, fireplace.
Oh, that'd be nice. No, I haven't won any awards. Of the EGOTs yet. Yeah, the Wickham Playwriting Award. I got an MFA in acting at Brown Trinity Rep.
Yes.
And one of the parts of that program, which is one of the reasons I went there, was we also studied playwriting and directing. Right. So that we emerged not just as actors, but as total artists. And I did win the playwriting award for my class, because that was one of my focuses while I was there.
Then singing. Have you had any formal training to sing?
Yes.
You've had formal training to sing.
For more than 20 years.
I listened to a few of the tracks that you've put on your website. They're quite... they're very sort of emotive songs, aren't they? The first one was Poetry by Dead Men, and I thought, poetry by dead men? That sounds a little depressing, if you don't mind me saying. So I kind of researched on that, and the words are absolutely beautiful, aren't they?
Great. Sarah Bareilles is such an incredible songwriter. I knew, as soon as I heard that song on her album a few years ago, I was like, I have to perform that. It's just
it was amazing. I mean, for anyone that doesn't know that one, it's described as it's a daydreamer's lament who couldn't in the moment step into love. Is there any personal experience for you in that? Can you relate to that?
Interesting. That's a very interesting summary of that song. I didn't really do any research into the song beforehand. I just really connected with the lyrics. I'm trying to think, because that performance was last fall. So I'm trying to remember what I might have tapped into. I mean, I feel like anybody who's been in a relationship that didn't work out can relate to that song.
Yeah,
The first line is,
sure,
by the time you
sure.
hear this, I'll be in the rearview mirror. You know,
I
that's
know.
like,
I was the girl
yeah,
who
definitely
was,
had a few of those
waiting for you to just admit that you were in love with me. And
right, but it
why
didn't
didn't
happen, and I'm not waiting any longer.
It's an
Right?
amazing song, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And then you also sing Gravity, and you also sing Movements in the Woods. And I hope you don't mind me saying, but when I listen to you singing, the only person who can, for my money, can ever put such emotion into a song is Barbara Streisand. And maybe people have said, oh, that there's a likeness there. And Adele. You just
love both of them. Nobody's ever compared me to either of them, so thank you.
When you listen to somebody like Streisand sing a song that is so powerful, she almost doesn't even need the music. Her voice, her expression. And I almost felt the same way when I was listening to you. The expression, it's, you're not just singing a song, you're feeling the song, aren't you? Really?
Yeah.
More than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that has always been the appeal to me. I've always sort of felt like an actor first.
Right.
Because it's one of the reasons I didn't go into opera. There was a moment when I started studying classical voice when I was in high school. And there were some people who wanted to kind of nudge me in that direction. And I never had any interest in opera. I have huge admiration for the people who do it. My mother worked for Connecticut Opera for a while when they still existed. And so I actually performed in a couple of operas with them at the time when I was in high school. But it was not, almost as a kind of like, should I do this? I wanted to sing in English, and I wanted to sing in English because I could connect to it. And I also wanted the acting to be foremost. Okay. And I think musical theater nowadays, with a lot of the pop singing that has infiltrated it, the focus oftentimes is on the sound. Can you produce this sound? I have lost jobs because they've said, well, we need somebody who can produce XYZ sound. Gosh. Like, we loved your acting, but we need this sound. To me, I would, that's fine. I would always rather be telling the story than just making a pretty noise, so.
Then from singing, we move on to the acting. And there is a wonderful, wonderful quote on your website, Motive Magazine. And if you don't mind me reading this out. Sure. The strikingly beautiful Barrie, I agree with that.
Thank you.
Gave an intensely honest performance. The role calls for her to experience every emotion, from love to hate, from joy to despair, and she does this perfectly. I think I'd be blown away if somebody said something like that.
I was. So that was
an amazing thing. Again, that comes back to Streisand. She doesn't just learn the words. She is that part. And it's the same for you, isn't it? You are that part. You've not just learnt the words and you're just repeating them parrot fashion.
And that particular quote was, that review was of a play that I did 10 years ago while I was in grad school at Trinity Repertory Theater Trinity Repertory Company, in Providence, Rhode Island. And as part of the master's degree, all of us got to play a role on the main stage with the professional acting company. And I was in a two-hander with one of my teachers. It was just the two of us. And it was a play called The How and the Why. And it was about, I have arrived. I think my character was a PhD candidate or recent graduate doing science research, showed up at the academic office of this other scholar, this older woman, who I know, but she doesn't yet, is my biological mother, who gave me up for adoption.
Oh, right.
And that's the play. And we have opposing theories about evolution. So yeah, and it's a two-act, two-hander. So it was an immensely amazing opportunity for me as a third-year drama student.
And very intense as well.
Very intense. And talk about,
I
mean, that was hence the, like, all the different emotions were in that play. So.
It's like, I remember, studying English years ago at school, and one of the plays we did was Waiting for Godot, and it's just two people on stage. That's it. I don't even know much of a set. I think it was just a box that they sat on. So, there was nothing even behind them. And yet, as you say, it is the most intensely intense experience, because you believe in these two. You have to believe in these two people, waiting for Godot, waiting for God, whatever you believe in it. But, you can relate to that sort of experience, obviously, then. What would be a challenge acting wise if someone suggested a role for you, and I don't know, off the top of your head, and would you think, oh gosh, I couldn't possibly do anything like that? What would be the most challenging type of acting role at the moment?
Interesting. Gosh, I tend to think more about what I want to do than what I feel I can't do.
Right.
I mean, I would love to play one of the great Shakespeare heroines, because it would be a challenge I would enjoy. Something like, actually, here's a good example. I would love to play Lady Macbeth.
Okay.
And I think I'd be afraid to play Cleopatra. I'm not old enough yet, but even thinking 10 or 20 years from now, Cleopatra, like, I don't, there's a great book by Zoe Caldwell, the actress Zoe Caldwell, called I Will Be Cleopatra, where she decided at a very young age that was the role that she wanted. And I look at that role and go, I don't even know, what do I make of that? So I think that's certainly a challenge for the future that I might or might not be able to meet. But Lady Macbeth is on my wish list. So.
Have you come over to England? Have you visited the Globe Theatre in London? Have you?
I have actually
on your wish list
many times. This is one of the reasons I specialize in British accents, is because I've had a lifelong relationship with England and some of its people. I have close family friends who I've known all my life who live in Sussex, and some members of their family who are no longer with us, who lived in Sheffield, who lived in London and other places. And I've got friends in London. So I'm in England every couple of years. Okay. The last time was in 2019. And the last time I went to the Globe, I did a summer program at the British American Drama Academy when I was 17, and we saw 2 shows at the Globe that summer. But I think I went to the Globe, I want to say in 2017. And so I did, because they had a fabulous exhibit on about the history of the place. Right. And there was a particular feature about women and why women weren't allowed to perform.
It's quite an experience in itself. Isn't it? The old bard.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, London is my favorite city in the world. And one of the things I love most is the theater. I mean, just the National Theater. I go every time I'm there, because we just don't have anything like that here.
When you are given a part, what kind of research, what kind of preparation might you do for a part?
It depends on what it is, but I often get cast in period pieces. I have this sort of very classical look, and I have a very a sensibility, I think, from another time, and I love history and historical fiction. So when I think all of the shows I've done off Broadway, is that right? No, not all of them. Most of the shows I've done off Broadway have taken place in previous eras. So I generally do a little bit of research about that time and place. For instance, I did a play with the Irish Repertory Theatre in New York in 2016-17 called The Dead 1904, which was based on James Joyce's short story, The Dead. So I read the story, and I did, a little research into what life was like in Dublin for this class of people at that time, and what it would have been like. I played a spinster, sort of 30-ish young woman, unmarried. And I learned that people in Ireland at that time tended to actually marry later. It wasn't out of the realm that she might have married later in life. And so I love learning history that way through the shows that I'm in or the books that I narrate, because history in school can be quite dry and focused on men and wars and things like that.
Mm.
So I love the opportunity to learn more about a historical period by doing research about the show that I'm in.
Your writing as well, just nipping back to the writing. I was reading some of the blogs that you'd written, and I'd like you to just explain to us one of them, which is very moving. It's called Grief and Pizza, and you know exactly which one it is. And I felt, I think anyone that's lost a parent, first of all, can relate to this. So it's a really, really moving account. Please just explain for anyone listening what this blog is called, what this blog is about, Grief and Pizza.
Sure. So my father died in February of 2018 after quite a short, sudden illness. And he loved pizza. He grew up in the Bronx and Yonkers, New York. So he was a native New Yorker, and New York pizza is a thing.
I'm sure it is here in Italy too.
Yes, but it's completely different there. Both really, really good. I had a wonderful pizza in Rome. I remember about, 10 years or so ago, but yes. So my dad went to high school in Yonkers, New York, and there was a pizza place across the street from his high school called Carlo's, which is still there. And he and I decided, I guess this would have been, I don't even remember the year, 2015, 16, something like that, that we wanted to try some of the more famous pizza places in Manhattan. And we also discovered, we were making our list, and he said, gosh, do you think Carlo's is still there? So I Googled it and said, yes, it is. We should go. So he and my mother and I drove to Yonkers one day and went and had pizza at Carlo's. And he was writing a little blurb for he was having some kind of high school reunion. I don't remember which one it was. And so he sent me to edit periodically. If he wanted to write like a letter to the editor or something like that, he would send it to me to edit, because I had this editing job at the time. And he sent me this sort of, maybe 500-word essay that he had written about his experience of going back to Carlo's after 50 years or whatever it was. And it never was published or posted. I'm not sure why. I don't know who he sent it to, but so I wrote the essay about how after he died, there was this pizza place on my corner in Manhattan that he and I used to go to together, and it was temporarily closed. This was way before the pandemic too, so it was some other issue. And I just melded my memories of him and of the pizza place on my corner with the essay that he wrote. Mm-hmm. And I tried to kind of connect what am I trying to say? Food is so powerful.
Well, I was just going to say that. So. It's very powerful. It's powerful to most people, to Italians even more. Eating food together, it's a rite, R-I-T-E. It's a rite of passage, isn't it? Eating. And I think most people can relate to a time, particularly childhood food, because it reminds you of a moment in your past, a nice moment. And this blog that you had just encompassed that. I mean, you were obviously close to your father.
Yes, I was. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about memories, after somebody has died or experiences is, the word bittersweet is so accurate, because I couldn't go into my corner pizza place for months and months and months. It was, I couldn't bear to, because it was so painful, the memory of going there with him. And now 4 years on, and I got there, way before that, but when I finally was able to, I think I put this in the essay actually, that one day my desire for pizza overrode my desire to, run away and cry. And I went and had it again, and now it's a lovely memory that I can say, like, hey, Dad, I'm eating pizza.
Is that like a cathartic process? Grief and pizza, when write about, people say that, don't they, if you have a moment in your life, for whatever reason that is not a good moment, it does help to write down your thoughts. It helps to clarify how you feel about something and how you can address it and move on in a way. Did you find the same to a certain extent?
I think so. Yes, I will. Two responses to that. One is that I've been keeping diaries since I was very young, since I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I think that's another thing that has really fed my writing in all the genres that I write in. Is that I just that practice expressing myself. That to me is the catharsis, and it is not meant for anyone else to read. That's just
Right.
that I need to write this down so it's out of me. When I craft a story like that, it's because I think other people need to read it as well and can relate to it. Obviously, it's wonderful talking about this with you because obviously you related to it and appreciated it. And then it helps. It's not just a catharsis. It's a kind of focusing of, beyond just this was my experience and I'm relating it. How do I kind of hone in on it in a way that other people will be able to access? And so it's structured, it's at post catharsis. I have now structured this and given it some order and some created a story from it. And that I think is really what facilitates the
with my mother, she died quite recently, but with my mother it was fish and chips. It wasn't pizza. My mother always regarded that as some kind of foreign food.
Well, it was, I guess.
But really, with my mom, it was fish and chips, and I don't think I could walk past a fish and chip place. It just made me think, with your blog about grief and pizza, how you put those two together, and I've never seen that done before, really. It just made me think, gosh, yes, you're absolutely right. Put it together with the food, and it's all such a wonderful idea. So let's move on to the narration. Now, this audio that you've put together on your video, on your website, is the most amazing, craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. The Walrus and the Carpenter in 25 accents.
Yes.
I mean, first of all, I just think, yes, well, that's a little far-reaching, but anyway, let's listen to this. And then, I don't know whether you should have those accents, where you've written them. This is this accent, this is the British one, this is the Yorkshire one. I think you should just let the audience guess. You're Stafford to pretend. Which accent is the 7th? Which accent is the 10th?
I made that video for a competition that the New York Times hosted, whatever year that was, 6 years ago, many years ago. I did not. I did not. They said it was an open call to performers called "Show Us Your Special Skill," because on an acting resume in this country, the bottom section is entitled "Special Skills," which which Brits seem to find very funny. I've had other British people say
that's certainly a skill. How do you do that? I mean,
sorry. Oh, yes. No, I'll explain. They said, show us your special skill. So I made that video. My special skill was, quote, acting with an accent. And then when I didn't win the competition, I thought, well, I'll just put it on my website, for fun. And that video has gotten more views and more responses than anything else I've ever put on YouTube. I'm going to put it
on mine, actually.
So, yeah.
I'm going to flash that over on my social media because that is the strangest thing I've ever heard. I mean, you go through. I think sometimes most people can generally do an English accent or a Russian one or a French one or an Italian one because you over exaggerate the way people speak. But you drill down even further. This is the Yorkshire one. This is the Southern accent. This is the Northern one.
You know,
this is the Scottish one.
Being from the UK, I mean, how one of my fascinations with it, and I've done is the accents, because you can travel 15 miles in here.
Absolutely.
The country is so small and the sounds are so varied.
Yeah.
When I was in graduate school, I got a summer travel grant. I proposed a project to go and travel around the UK for 3 weeks and study accents, which basically just meant I went around and talked to people about how they spoke. And I was in the Southeast, Southwest, the Midlands, the North, and Scotland. And I didn't even get to go to all the places I wanted to. In 2019, recently, I went back just on vacation and did some more traveling to other places like Newcastle, and that I hadn't been
That
to
far
listen to
north.
the
Gosh.
way people speak. But when I stayed in Warwick.
Oh, yes.
And I spoke to one person I happened to run into somebody from Birmingham because I was interested in the Birmingham
Yes,
accent.
very
But the
different.
woman who ran the B&B
Yep.
that I was
Yep.
staying at in Warwick
Yep.
was from the Black Country. And I
Okay.
said, what's that? And she was explaining the difference between Birmingham and Wolverhampton, which are, I don't know how far apart, 20 miles?
Yes.
And I have a 20-minute interview with her where she explained to me what the difference is between those two accents.
Oh, they are.
I was fascinated.
Yeah, they are. I was listening to all of those and I thought, that's pretty good, actually.
Thank you.
That's pretty good. Yeah, the Irish one. I mean, somebody actually put on Facebook not so long ago that if you travel 4 hours in the States, you're still in the same county. If you travel 4 hours in England, the accent has changed 5 times and still has the name for a bread roll.
That's absolutely right.
As you travel all over the place. And I think now things have changed and everybody's quite proud of their accent. The BBC now, BBC broadcasters, newsreaders, they all bring in their own accents now. Yes, gone are the days when this is the BBC. We don't have that anymore. It's quite bizarre that now everyone is embracing the accents. I mean, in my case, I had to try and get rid of mine.
And I'm in suspense now. Please tell me where in the North you are from.
Manchester.
Manchester, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was very northern, but I spent years at elocution because my parents thought that it would increase my chances of getting a job more if I didn't speak with such a northern factory working class accent. How snobbish is that?
You know what? That's another thing that's always really fascinated me about Britain versus the US as well, as we have two completely different class systems, and it's exactly what you said earlier. Is very much the case that regional accents were associated with the working class versus our received pronunciation being associated with the upper classes, and we don't have that distinction here. No. I mean, it exists a little bit.
Yeah, it's changing now. It is changing now. I think the only thing for us is that if I travelled to Scotland, I don't think I'd understand a word. We were not so long ago in Newcastle and we sat next to a couple and she kept talking to us and I kept saying, pardon? Because I didn't really understand a word she was saying. And then the further north that you get, the Scottish accent changes and that becomes even harder to understand. But
there's a TV show called Shetland, which I really like, which is based on the books by, is it Anne Cleeves, I think. And every so often I have to turn the subtitles on. Not very often, but now and then when they get somebody on that show who is really from Shetland, it's impossible.
But when you did The Walrus and the Carpenter in 25 accents, not only regional United Kingdom, but you also do regional American ones, which to my ear are quite difficult to detect. A friend of ours was Canadian. Well, she sounded American to me because it sounds the same. So that's kind of tuning your ear. But then you do all around the world, you do a Norwegian one, you do a beautiful Italian one and a French one and a Russian one. They're absolutely amazing. What presents a challenge in terms of accents? Which accent can you not perfect?
The East Asian ones are very difficult. And the only reason that I have to do any sort of accents that are not either from English-speaking countries or from European countries is in an audiobook, right? Because I would never play a role of somebody who, was not of my ethnicity. So accents like Chinese, Japanese, I've had to do a couple from different African countries, mostly for just a few lines of dialogue in a book. But I try to be very, as accurate as possible. So those I have to go, well, it's the same way that I teach myself any accent, but with those in particular, where the language itself, they're non-native English speakers,
Yeah.
and the language is really, really different from anything English or European. I go and I listen to people from those places speaking English and choose a few sound changes that are going to give the most authentic sort of light accent possible, so that my listeners can
Right.
still understand what I'm saying, but
Right.
they will believe within reason
Yeah.
that
You
I
have to
am
believe, don't you?
from that
And
place.
let's move on very neatly into audiobooks, because it's an area that really fascinates me. And I think we all know that the trend now in audiobooks is increasing as we speak. The figures are just amazing. In 2020, publishers experienced a 12% increase in audiobooks, and this growth shows no signs of stopping. By 2027, this industry will be a $19 billion industry. So you will never be out of a job, young lady.
That would be very nice.
You did pick the right profession, really, for this. So let's move on to the audiobook side. Now, when I first started listening to the Venice Sketchbook, which is primarily about English people, I know they go to Italy. And when I first started listening to the accent, I just thought, I know this person, I know this person, I know this voice. This voice is Lady Mary from Downton Abbey. This is that accent, because it's such a beautiful, beautiful, quintessentially English accent. And then, of course, I researched it and I thought, oh, no, it's not that actress at all, and this is an American lady. And an American lady that's doing English accents, how is this possible? I mean, this for you is absolutely amazing. And you are working you've done audiobook narration, Penguin, Random House, Hachette, McMillan, Harper, Tanter, Blackstone, Audible. Wow. I'm just blown away. You must be so in demand. And I do thank you for your time today.
Of course.
How do you feel about that? Do you just think, gosh, I'm in the right place at the right time here, and I can do all these accents that they want? Yes.
So well, I'll sort of backtrack a little bit so you kind of understand how and why all of this happened. First of all, with regard to the accents, I mean, I just have always sort of had an ear for it. And when I was a kid, could imitate people. And I have been consuming British media for all my life. So I think just in addition to the friends that we had, and we'd go there to visit her, they'd come here. So English accents have always been just feeding into my ears. And I just have one of those ears where I can repeat what I hear, and I take no credit for that. That's something I was born with, like the ability to sing. But when I was in college, I had a fantastic speech and dialects professor at Cornell. Took her dialects class in my sophomore year, was her teaching assistant in my senior year, and somewhere in between was approached by a student director who said, I hear you're really good at an English accent. I said, sure. He said, can you coach my show? So I went to my professor and said, how do I become a dialect coach? And I started doing that. I started doing that in college and have done that sort of as a side business all along. And what I learned in dialects class was how to break down an accent into sound changes. Okay. So for example, if I want to, let's just take the accent that I used for the Venice Sketchbook, which is called Received Pronunciation RP, right? That's what I used for the chapters that took place in the 1920s and 30s.
Yes.
And I switched in the other chapters to what I call modern standard British, which is more like
change.
Hugh Grant, Emma Thompson, it's estuary. So if I wanted to, help somebody else learn how to transition from their general American to standard British, I would say, well, in the southeast of England, R's are dropped, right? Almost everywhere in England except the southwest. So the word world becomes world. You don't say the R. And that's how it gets broken down. So whenever I have to learn a new accent, I know how to teach them to myself just listening to those speakers, breaking down those changes and practicing them. So when I started doing audiobooks in 2012, when I was still in grad school, I started working for a company that's no longer with us called Audio Go, which was in Rhode Island where I lived at the time. They needed somebody who spoke Spanish. They didn't have a whole lot of Spanish speakers. And there was a book that they needed to cast about one of the four narrators had to be a woman from Spain, or the character was a woman from Spain. So it was third person narration, but I had to do these Spanish accents, and I studied Spanish in school. So I co-narrated that book. That was my first one. I've never taken a class in audiobook narration, but having listened to them, especially I think as a kid, I don't listen to them much now, to be honest with you. I prefer to read on paper, but I had an idea of what,
right.
I listened to a lot of samples to just kind of get a sense of what that needed to sound like, plus then my actor training and my voice, extensive in grad school voice and speech
all
training.
These talents come into play, don't they?
They really do with the audiobooks. They do. And so when
ability coming together, I think it's so important when you listen to an audiobook. It's almost like listening to a play. You need some dramatization. It's not just somebody reading a book.
Right. A lot of people don't realize that.
No, they don't, do they?
They say, oh, maybe I get, you can't.
Just reading. No, you're not just reading.
You're not just reading a book, right? And then people say to me, well, do you do all the voices? And I say, yeah, that's the point.
You are
dramatizing like doing a play all on my own. And when I moved back to New York after grad school and started getting referred by people, it's sort of how I got into audiobooks, was like one referral after another. One person said, one of the first books that I did for Harper was, you'll be interested in this. The producer approached me. She had approached a friend of mine who said, I can't do that accent, but I know someone who can. Can you do a hybrid Italian and British accent? I said, tell me more about this. She said, well, this young woman was born in England, but then she moved to Italy, and now she's in her 20s and she's moving back to Britain. So the book talks about how she speaks British English with an Italian accent, sort of. I said, sure, I can do that. And I figured it out. What does that sound like? What does that mean as far as her pronunciation of words and this kind of cross-cultural thing? I mean, it was a Regency romance novel that I did for Harper, but that kind of launched my reputation as an accent specialist. And so people continued referring me for jobs. I like to say I'm everybody's obscure accent person. The way that I learned things like Norwegian and Australian, and people coming to me and saying, okay, we need this book that, the narration is standard British, but the characters are from these 5 countries. And almost all of the time I just say yes and then figure it out. If there's an accent that I don't know, then I learn it for the purposes of the book, which is easier than learning it for performing on stage because it's isolated dialogue that I'm doing. Although back to Scottish accents, I did do an off-Broadway play that took place in Scotland and did have to speak for 2 hours in a Scottish accent, which was a lot of fun, but took serious practice.
What I wonder is when, the process of it. So one of the big publishers will say, right, Barrie, we've got this book. How does that work? What's the process? Do they give you direction? Do they just leave you to it and you just turn up to the studio? What's the process?
So I'll take you briefly through the whole process. So I book audiobooks.
You say that, you say, how is it? Process?
Process, yes. So yes, you would say process.
You say tomato and I say tomato.
Yes, and one of the
Let's call the whole thing off.
One of the things that I am also fascinated by is the vocabulary differences between the US and the UK.
It's amazing.
And those pronunciations that I have to know. I mean, I have to know those individual words, not beyond just the sound changes, but that when I'm doing a British book, that I do have to say process and not process, because otherwise
schedule instead of schedule.
Schedule, exactly. Yes. So, I can carry on talking like this if it doesn't. Right. So the process works in one of 2 ways.
Okay.
When a producer has casting authority, so say a producer at one of the big 5 publishers like, Hachette or Macmillan, a book comes across their desk and it says they get to decide who the narrator is. They will email me and say, are you available and interested? If so, it's yours. These days, more than half the time, if the audiobook is coming out at the same time as the book itself. So if, like with Reese's book, I don't actually know who Reese's publisher is because her audiobooks are being done by Audible.
Yeah.
But that was a simultaneous release. In that case, the author often has some say in who the narrator is, which from a writer's point of view, I think is wonderful, because
yes,
then
absolutely.
you get, some choice. In that case, the producer will email me and say, if you're available and interested, could you record a 5-minute sample from this chapter that and then they send me the first chapter of the book. I go in my closet with my microphone and my computer and I record an audition sample and send it. And typically the author gets to listen to anywhere between 2 and 5 samples and choose the narrator that they want.
Right.
Excuse me. And Reese actually told me that she chose me. One of the reasons, and I loved this, was because the voice that I did for the character of the aunt, I can't remember her first name now, the aunt, but that Hortensia, I think it was Aunt Hortensia, reminded her of somebody that she knew. That was the voice that she heard in her head for that character.
It was very Agatha Christie, I thought.
Yes, I somehow tapped into that and she loved it. And I love hearing that because I don't often get to hear why an author chooses me. Either I get the book or I don't. So that was lovely. And then I felt really invested in that character because I had sort of tuned into what Reese was looking for, which was great. So once I have booked the book, again, one of two things happens. Either I'm going to be in a recording studio just with an engineer, in which case they are running the recording software, but I basically have creative authority in some ways, or there's also a director there, and the director is there to help guide my performance. Either way, the author always if the author is involved, if the author is alive and involved in the process, they can provide whatever input they want. Sometimes I get nothing from them. They say, we loved your audition, do whatever, that's fine. Sometimes I get pages of information saying, this is what these characters are like, this is how I hear them. Occasionally they'll say, be more specific about accents or about voices. I love hearing a certain amount of information from the author because I want to produce something that approximates what they've been hearing in their mind. Some authors don't necessarily have a sense of what those voices sound like, and they're more than happy for me to just take it away. But either way, there's generally some communication with the author, either through the publisher or directly. More often than not, I have to go through the publisher. Audible has their narrators connect with authors directly, which is why I got to speak to Reese via email. And then at that point, the sessions are scheduled and I go into the recording studio and I do anywhere, usually an average of 3 finished hours a day, in a like a 5 to 6 hour recording day. The amount of time that's budgeted, the sort of industry standard is 2 studio hours per finished hour. So if it's going to be a 10-hour book, they book me 20 hours in the studio. And I usually take a 10-minute break every hour or so and make some more tea. I drink herbal tea with honey all day long while I'm recording.
And you don't need to read the book beforehand. You don't.
Oh, I absolutely do. Yes. Sorry. That was sort of a production process.
I was going to say, how would you know what the, okay.
As far as my own process, absolutely. I always read the book beforehand because I don't want any surprises.
No, I suppose not.
And, if I narrate mostly novels, I do some nonfiction, but mostly fiction. And especially for things like mysteries, I have to know who the murderer is.
Yeah, of course.
Because that informs my performance. So what I do, they send me a PDF. They send me the script as a PDF and I load it onto my iPad, and there's a particular app that allows me to annotate it. And the principal thing that I do with fiction is I highlight the character dialogue in different colors so that I know who's speaking at a glance and I don't have to pause to figure it out. I also make a word list, any words that I don't know the pronunciations of.
I was going to say, if you get a word wrong, is it, I've said that wrong, or I stumbled over a word? I mean,
no, not at all. With digital recording, it's so easy. They just, if I make a mistake, I stop and they go back. Well, there's two different ways of recording as well, right? There's what we call open roll and punch and roll. Open roll means they hit record. And if you make them, it's just rolling. If you make a mistake, you stop, you go back to wherever and you keep going, and it all gets edited at the end.
Yeah, cut and
Punch and
slice.
roll is more common because it's much easier for the editors. If you make a mistake, you stop, they go back to right before you made the mistake, you hear the last 2 seconds of what you've just done, and then you keep going. So, but it's not a big deal. I started my audiobook career doing educational audiobooks, which was what we call cold reading. I would just arrive and they would hand me the script. So I got a lot of practice in accuracy. So I tend to be a very accurate reader for that reason. I don't make a ton of, like reading mistakes, but obviously you have to be able to stop and all that stuff.
But it's an absolute tribute to you. It's an absolute credit to you that when there is an English book to be narrated, that the publisher, they're not looking for an English person. It seems a little strange in some ways that, do we not have any narrators in England then?
Yes, so this has to do actually with the publishers themselves.
Yes.
If the book is by an English author and is principally being published in England, the production happens in England.
Yeah.
If it's and either an American author writing about Brits or an English author,
then it would be done
in most places, or in some cases an Australian author who has a US UK publisher, and those are the same. All sorts of situations where, I am primarily doing the American productions of these books, but it really depends on.
I don't think the narrator, such as yourself, gets enough credit because people are downloading these books on Audible. I am all the time. It's important to me who's narrating it, but your name should be in bold letters as the narrator. You have the credit for reading this and bringing it to life. And if people like you were not successful, then the audiobook industry would not be showing the growth that it is now. So that's down to you.
Thank you.
Making such a success of it. It's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Thank you. And to your point about with regard to, British and American production, I had a situation it was last April, I guess. There was a book called Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. Jennifer Saint is a British author and has a British publisher, but she's with Macmillan. And so Macmillan US was supposed to be buying the audio production from Macmillan UK. And for some reason that I don't know or understand, that fell through, and they needed to do a separate American production at the last minute. And I happened to be available. Right. So that was where it was like, we want this. And they were open to me doing it in British or American English. I said I prefer British because the author's British. That's the voice she's thinking in. Right. And I narrated the American edition of that book and ended up being nominated for an audio award for it, which was
You're getting lots of awards, young lady, aren't you?
Thank you. But Jennifer's second book came out this year, Electra, and that was a multi-narrator book, and it was produced in England. I didn't have the opportunity to do it because that actually just had a solely British production, which is now being sold in the US as well.
It's amazing. And we will, on that note, I just want to thank you for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I want to give you a challenge to finish on. Okay. An accent challenge.
Okay.
We had a film, a British film, when was it? 2021, called The Dig. A BBC drama. Lily James from Downton Abbey, Carey Mulligan and Ralph Fiennes.
Yes, I saw it.
Set in Suffolk. Now, a Suffolk accent to the uninitiated is one of the hardest accents to recognize. My husband was born in Suffolk. So when he's watching it, and he knew that Ralph Fiennes had months and months of tuition with local Suffolk people, and my husband said, he's nailed that. Absolutely nailed that Suffolk accent. But some of the others, it was a bit Cornish, it was a bit Devon, it was a bit country. And I thought, I'm going to give you an accent challenge, a Suffolk accent, and see what you make of it.
I have to be honest with you, having never traveled to Suffolk. having never had to do a Suffolk or Norfolk, for that matter, accent for any kind of book. I actually do not know what that sounds like, although I did see The Dig.
Okay.
And I know what you mean, because I think it is one where they sometimes do pronounce R's.
Yeah.
And that can often get mixed up with West Country.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But so I would probably have the same feeling where I'd end up sounding like I'm Somerset.
You see, my husband would say, that's not a Suffolk accent, that's a Somerset accent.
No, it's a Somerset accent. That's his right
anyway,
way.
on that note, I'll let you go. It's supper time here, as you can imagine, because I've got my aperitif. So thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating to enter your world, and whatever award you are nominated for, I am in no doubt that you deserve every single one. You really do. You're amazing. You really are. So thank you for your time. It's been wonderful. It really has.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It was delightful speaking with you.
Thank you. Take care. Ciao.
Ciao.
She said in a northern accent. Ciao. Bye.
Bye.